Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. So we've already heard this morning from the leading national oil company in the LNG sector, and now it is the turn of the leading international oil company. Shell has a long, proud and pioneering history in gas. It was involved in the first commercial LNG shipment in 1964 from Algeria to the UK, just down the Thames estuary from here in Canvey Island. It's overseen the development of some of the world's biggest gas fields, Groningen in the Netherlands, Troll in Norway, Lunskoye as part of the Sakhalin development in Russia. It's now the world's largest portfolio LNG player, and as we've heard other people refer to already this morning, it's just taken another pioneering step with the final investment decision on the LNG Canada project. So to discuss not just Shell's history, but Shell's future and prospects for gas more generally, please join me in welcoming the Chief Executive of Royal Dutch Shell, Ben van Beurden.
Thanks very much, Jim. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be back with you again, especially as this year marks the 50-year anniversary of our operations here in the North Sea. Of course, many people wonder about the future of the North Sea. They actually wonder about the future of the whole oil and gas industry. And in the context of climate change, they wonder about the future of the world. And I'm sure we get to talk about that a little bit as well. They're all big issues, of course, for our industry. And I talk about them actually quite regularly. And as a result of that, you might have seen some headlines about Shell's investments in hydrogen and moves into electric car charging. Perhaps about Shell's acquisition of First Utility, our first major step in this country to serve customers in the power sector. And a few months ago, also here in London, I suggested that the UK should consider ending sales of conventional cars well ahead of 2040. That got a little attention at the time as well. But even though these headlines are true, they can also be misleading. They might even make people think that we have gone soft on the future of oil and gas. And if they think that, they would be wrong. So I thought I would take the chance today to update you on where Shell is. This being Gas Day, I thought it would be good to major on gas here, how it fits in with Shell, how it fits in the global energy landscape, and how the industry can help make sure that natural gas fits in with what customers need and want. But first of all, let's go briefly back to those headlines again. So our spending on new energies is indeed huge. It's about $1 to $2 billion out of a total annual capital spending of around $25+ billion. I believe it's right to be spending up to $2 billion on areas like renewables and new fuels, supplying electricity, because that's what our customers will want over the long term. And Shell intends to stay with our customers over the long term as well. But we also intend to stay with them right now, next year, and for all the years to come until this long-term future actually becomes reality. We will change over time. Shell's portfolio will evolve. And things like renewables will become a bigger part of what we do. But that pace of change will be linked to the pace of change in society. We do plan to be at the forefront of change in our industry, but we cannot and we will not seek to dislocate ourselves from the people who buy our products. That means Shell's core business is and will be, for the foreseeable future, very much oil and gas, and particularly natural gas. Oil is going to be needed by this world for a long time to come, and gas even longer. And yes, we've made a few big moves recently into gas. The biggest was, of course, BG Group. We acquired BG for many reasons, including its excellent deep water business in Brazil. But its gas assets were really the true jewel in the crown. Overnight, we cemented our position as the number one IOC in LNG. And there have been plenty of other moves as well, of course, in the recent past. You look at Sakhalin 2, one of the world's largest integrated export-oriented oil and gas projects. You all know about Pearl GTL. It's the world's largest source of gas to liquids products. And then there's Prelude, our new floating liquefaction facility off the coast of Australia. Of course, there is LNG Nigeria, 6 production lines in operation, and there's Pennsylvania Petrochemicals, which will be using shale gas once construction is complete. So exploration, production, liquefaction, transport, regasification, petrochemicals, you will find Shell wherever you find natural gas. Somebody remind you to switch your phones? And then, of course, we haven't mentioned LNG Canada. Don't worry, I will come back to that a bit later. Now, over the last 10 years, Shell has invested heavily in gas, and we will continue to grow that side of the business. We have already grown it so that gas accounts for 1/3 of our capital investment. And these days, we produce roughly as much gas as we produce oil. So although the pace of growth may be a little less dramatic than in recent years, it is still growth. But with 1/3 of the company's capital invested in gas, it cannot just be growth. The integrated gas business has to generate serious cash. And that's why we have classified it as a cash engine in our portfolio alongside oil products and the conventional oil and gas business. All these 3 businesses must and do make a major contribution to the foundations of the rest of the company and to shareholder distributions. Now, by contrast, we look at our deep water business and our petrochemicals business as our main areas for growth. And shales and new energies are a little bit further out. We see them more as emerging opportunities. So we have invested heavily in gas, to the point that we now lead the international oil companies, and we absolutely intend to keep it that way. Now, why is that? Well, because we see gas as the fastest growing hydrocarbon market. Between 2018 and 2035, we expect natural gas demand to grow at an average of 2% per year. That's twice the rate of normal total energy demand growth. And the future of liquefied natural gas looks even more promising. We expect LNG demand to grow on average with 4% per year until 2030. Now, that growing demand for gas means that new projects must come on stream. And if I talk for a moment about Europe, yes, there is definitely a future for the North Sea, and Shell is investing into that future. This year alone, we have taken a final investment decision on the Penguins field. This means building our first manned installation in the northern North Sea for almost 30 years. And we also decided to invest in the Fram field in the central North Sea. But no oil and gas well, as you well know, has indefinite future. And it is also so with the North Sea. Production will decline, and eventually it will run dry. And as it does, international suppliers like Shell, are going to be ever more important for European energy security. More important because Europe will have to import more. From the US, from North Africa, from the Middle East, and yes, if Europe wants to have an affordable and secure energy supply from Russia as well. And to that point, for all the genuine, deeply felt political concerns around Nord Stream 2, the reality is Europe is going to need it. And when it comes to global LNG demand, the situation is even more acute. In particular, Shell has been warning for 2 years running now about the low level of international investments in LNG. And in this year's LNG outlook, we raised the possibility of a supply crunch by the mid-2020s. And now it's time for me to talk about LNG Canada. Because if anything shows you that Shell means business when it comes to gas, it is this project. We have taken a final investment decision with our joint venture partners, and construction of the plant has started. We expect our first LNG from LNG Canada by the mid-2020s. For us, it's the right project, the right place, and at the right time. The site has access, of course, to abundant and low-cost gas. A lot of the infrastructure is already there, an ice-free port, roads, railway, power. And LNG from the project will be able to reach Tokyo in half the time of a cargo from the Gulf of Mexico. Less than half, actually. And it's due to come on stream at exactly the time when we expect demand for LNG to be outstripping supply. But LNG Canada is also right in 2 other ways, both of them crucial for the entire gas industry. The first of them is that LNG Canada is right on cost. Everything has been done to bring costs down to the minimum without compromising safety. From using tried and tested modular construction methods to the decision to avoid overcomplicating things on a technical level, instead of that using pretty standard kit. The fiscal framework provided by the Canadian government also helped ensure that the project would go ahead. Let me be quite clear, LNG Canada would not have made it if it had not such a compelling case on cost. And so it should be, even at a time of $70, $80, or maybe even $90 oil. Or I would say especially at a time of higher prices, because history tells us that when costs get out of control, customers turn elsewhere. So LNG Canada is compelling on cost, but it's also compelling on greenhouse gas emissions. LNG Canada will have one of the lowest greenhouse gas emission profiles for a project of its kind, in a large part because of our decision to use hydropower in the design. And it's critically important that the industry works to improve the environmental case for gas. Of course, we all know here about the superiority of gas as a cleaner source of power over coal. It emits between 45 and 55% lower greenhouse gas emissions than coal when you use it to generate electricity, and less than a tenth of air pollutants. We all know that the flexibility of gas-powered turbines makes natural gas an ideal partner for intermittent renewables. And it's advantages like this, alongside the carbon price floor, that have squeezed coal out of the power generating picture here in the UK. And the next stage for the UK, by the way, would be greater use of gas in industrial processes and in the decarbonisation of gas power generation with carbon capture and storage. But these environmental benefits of natural gas over coal are simply not enough. Society rightly demands even cleaner energy. And where natural gas is concerned, this means that we must reduce leaks of methane throughout the production, transmission, and use system. And that is why last November, Shell helped put together some guiding principles focused on reducing methane emissions. And that's why I'm so glad that 15 other companies have joined us in signing up to them. And it's also why Shell has launched a major push to improve the data we gather on our own operational methane leaks. And that includes oil as well as gas projects. And with better data, we can ensure that we hit the target that we announced last month to ensure that we keep our methane emissions intensity for both oil and gas below 0.2% by 2025. That's not factor data, that is actually measured data. Now, it's for this reason and all the other reasons that I've outlined that I've said to you, you should look at LNG Canada to see that Shell means business in gas. We do. It is the latest of the company's big moves on gas. I think they are smart moves, moves making Shell financially stronger. With a consistent focus on keeping costs down, they will remain smart moves. And I believe moves into gas can be smart for the industry as a whole. And even more so if it can continue to come together to boost the environmental case for gas by tackling methane leaks. If it can, I feel confident in gas that it will pay out handsomely for a very long time to come. Now, I do not expect this stance to make big news. Let's see tomorrow, but I don't think any newspaper will run a story with the headline, "Oil and Gas CEO has confidence in the future of gas." That is not news, but it's nevertheless true. Thank you very much.
So a few questions, and let's start with the big project you've just taken FID on LNG Canada. So we've got this now coming on stream, you say mid-2020s. We have the plans, the expanded plans we heard about earlier today from Saad Al-Kaabi, QP's expansion. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering where this leaves your thoughts on this sort of supply shortfall you've talked about, because these are very big investments, but we've not had a lot of new capacity committed to in recent years. Is the industry starting to do enough, or is there still going to be a problem, you think, in 10 years, sort of 5-10 years' time?
Well, it depends a little bit. It's always hard to really see where the demand curve is. Demand is not very visible in LNG. It's always incipient, and as unfulfilled demand cannot be easily pointed at. Supply is very visible. You can just look at the plants, add it all up, and you can see where it's going to go. I think, though, that if you look into the 2020s with our investment, with some other plans that we are aware of, the Qatari plans, I think that will simply also not be enough to close the gap. We will need more things to continue to close that gap, because I think demand growth in LNG at 4% per year will continue for quite some time to come. So we will need more than just what has been in the public domain by now.
Okay. You mentioned, you said LNG Canada is the right project in the right time, the right place. Mm-hmm. You said cost is a very important part of that calculation. Now, we've had lots of LNG project developers over the past, 10, 15 years talk with confidence about the economics of projects and their hopes for the budget and the timeline, and things have gone badly wrong. Even some projects Shell has been involved in. What are you sort of thinking of? What kind of tricks have you got up your sleeves to make sure that doesn't happen with LNG Canada?
I think we probably have spent more time on a project like LNG Canada than we have had on previous large-scale projects, in terms of de-risking it, really thinking through the contracting strategy, getting a fair degree of simplification in the supply chain, in the design, in the construction methodologies, to the point that we have more confidence in the predictability. If you just look back over the last 4 or 5 years, the track record that we now have on delivering projects on budget, ahead of schedule, is actually quite compelling. Mm-hmm. The other thing which is quite important, of course, is that where it has gone wrong with projects was typically when they are truly frontier. And particularly if that also happened in coinciding with other projects and in a heated market. I think that is probably a different case now with Canada. As I said, it's actually a brownfield site, it's not a greenfield site. There is not another sort of major development going on the west coast of Canada at the same time. So I think with all of that, better preparation, better design, better supply chains, different contracting strategy, but also getting the timing right, mm-hmm. And actually choosing the site very carefully, I think we are set up much better than we have ever been before.
Okay. And what do you think overall capital cost is going to be for LNG Canada?
Well, we said it would be about $1,000 per ton per annum. That is the number we put out there. That is for the plant. Of course, there is much more capital cost. If you look at the entire life cycle of the project, we will, of course, be incurring capital cost every year on the upstream as well, because it will be unconventional gas feeding it. So you can take a broader view and look at a bigger picture. But the capital cost that we put out there was this particular marker, $1,000 per ton per annum, which I think is a competitive cost level.
But the headline figure is roughly what, 20 billion or 25 billion or?
Oh, that's not our headline. That's the headline of somebody doing the sums in a certain way.
Okay. All right. As I said, we heard from QP Saad Al-Kaabi earlier on about their LNG expansion plans. They are going to be potentially looking for partners. Is this something Shell's interested in participating in?
Well, you've heard Saad this morning talk about the project and partnership and how that was a base strategy for them to have strong partners in delivering this project. You've also heard him say that the partners should bring something to the party, and that's fair enough. That's how we have always looked at partnerships as well. I think we have a very compelling set of attributes that we can bring to a partnership. And we know we have to compete for it, and we do. So we will be putting forward a proposition when we are invited to do so.
Okay. I mean, this is a major expansion. Obviously, there's going to be a major capital commitment there. You've talked, quite frequently about a hard ceiling for your own capex, I think at 30 billion. That can all be managed, LNG Canada and possible participation in Qatar. That would all fit within that framework.
Absolutely. The 30 billion is a very hard number in case of any doubt. And this is not in addition to, this has always been part of our long-term plans. We do not make up our capital plans every year. We look or on a year-by-year basis. We look years ahead, and this is a set of options that we have planned for. And you know, it's $30 billion. You've got to spend it on something, Jim.
I never thought of it that way.
It's a lot of money.
Okay. Just to switch gears a little bit, I mean, you've given us a very strong statement of faith in the future of gas. A lot of us will have seen this IPCC report about what needs to be done really to get us down to a 1.5 degree increase in temperature by 2050, I think. Now that paints a fairly harrowing picture of the planet's future if we don't do this. I just wondered where gas kind of fits in that scenario if we have to take the steps that they're outlining.
Well, gas has a role to play in that scenario, and you can sort of have an endless discussion about semantics. Is it a transition role, a destination role, or whatever? I think in the end, it is a bit of both. Yeah, if you look to what the world really needs to do to get to 1.5 degrees C, I look at all the scenario work that we have done. We used to look at scenarios as a sort of a forward view of what the world could end up doing. But in the case of Paris and climate change, we have actually also worked back and said, well, you know, what if the world was going to meet this 2 degree or maybe even 1.5 degree? What would need to happen? And if you reason back, we came to the conclusion that, you know, if you get to net zero emissions by 2070, you would get to a profile for, you know, primary energy demand and electrification of the different sectors of the economy and carbon capture and storage and energy efficiency and everything else that would actually be technically about doable. It would actually macroeconomically be about doable. It would not be commercially viable under today's regulations and policies and market designs. So things would have to change. So putting a price on carbon and having some other different regulations out there to help us as well to have, for instance, a massive electricity build out. But it is doable, and you can get to net zero emissions by 2070. We then at MIT do detailed work on our scenario and say, well, what does it mean for temperatures? And I got to 1.75 degrees. Now you may say, well, that's not good enough. We need to get to 1.5. Now you can get to 1.5 as well, but not by just pulling the same levers a little bit harder, because they are being pulled roughly as fast and as hard as we are currently imagining. Now, what we think can be done, though, is massive reforestation. That is going to be part of the solution mix anyway. But if you think of extra reforestation, so here think of another Brazil in terms of rainforest, you can get to 1.5 degrees C. But it's not what sometimes people think, you know, we'll just do a little bit more solar and wind and then, you know, we'll get there. It's already, to get to less than 2 will be sort of quite unimaginable on an unprecedented scale of collaboration. And getting to 1.5 is a major challenge on top of it. But it can be done. The only plea I always make is, let's stop squibbling in society about whose fault it is and who should do what and who knew and who didn't know and whatever else. Let's just start working together on this rather than just have an endless festival of opinions and disagreements.
Okay. I just wanted to come back to something you said there about all the levers are being pulled as hard as they can be at the moment. I mean, as you mentioned in your speech, you have taken these steps on methane mitigation. This has fed into what the OGCI announced a couple of weeks ago. That's, you know, that was very well received by people like the Environmental Defence Fund. That's the industry taking initiative here. But you then have direction of policy with respect to methane emissions, for example, in the US, that's going the other way. And these regulations are being eased. So there's some levers there that are not being pulled quite as hard as they could. I mean, do you think that was the wrong message to be sending to the industry and to the country more generally?
Well, you have to be very careful about messaging there as well. I think a lot of people will look at this and say, oh, right, okay, so this is actually a retrograde step. This is actually a big sob for the industry that doesn't want to sort of come to the party, etc. Well, the reality is there were some regulations in there that were kind of unpractical, unworkable, and if truth be told, they needed to be revised. But at the same time, we have also been very clear, we want to also see very strong and very high level or demanding regulations when it comes to methane fugitive emissions in the supply chain as well. And if they are not there, which you could argue is indeed the case in the US, we don't think the US is as tight, forgive the pun, on methane emissions as they should be, then we are just going to apply our own standards to it. I think it would be better, indeed, if the world would embrace this more broadly, as they, would also embrace carbon pricing more broadly. But at some point in time, you just have to do the right thing as a company, even though the regulations don't necessarily strictly ask for it.
Okay. We've got a few minutes for questions, so there will be microphones around. If you can just identify yourself when the microphone gets to you. Yeah, we've got one here, third row from the front, just here.
Yeah, Patrick Common-Ward, Danagas. Just a question about carbon capture and storage. It's going to have to play a really important role going forward for a 1.5 or even a 1.75 world. What needs to be done now in order to make that happen in a commercially viable way?
I think a number of things that need to happen. Of course, you could argue that, listen, as long as there is a high enough carbon price, it will happen. But the reality, of course, is the carbon price that we would be looking at with today's state of technology and commercialization and everything else would probably be out of reach from a political perspective. Yeah, you would be looking at, I don't know, $75 a ton, yeah? Or maybe even higher. So what we need is nevertheless the first few projects, and we have a few, but not enough, to go onto the technology de-risking curve and the real implementation curve of this technology as well. So I think it's relatively easy to pick out a number of projects that would make sense, either here in the UK or in continental Europe or in the US, possibly a few in Asia as well. China has a few as well. Maybe they are enhanced oil recovery projects, which of course is a little bit sensitive in the minds of many, but they are real opportunities to capture and sequester CO2 that will give us the learning curve to bring costs down, to demonstrate that it can be done, to demystify it, but to also deal with some of the challenges that are also there, like, for instance, legal uncertainties, commercial issues, and everything else. So I think we need a little raft of pilot projects, if you like, or first large-scale demonstration projects that, with the help of government, actually start to make sense. Now, we've always said, if we find projects that are strategic for us, like, for instance, decarbonizing our own manufacturing facilities in the Port of Rotterdam, and we can work with the Port of Rotterdam and a few others on putting an infrastructure in place to capture and sequester CO2 in the North Sea, we'll be right in there. And that can be the beginning of a larger infrastructure that then can be built on. So we are looking for very pragmatic steps for making this happen. And then hopefully, over time, as costs come down, as maybe a bit of political opposition or societal opposition against this further fades, and as the price of carbon goes further up, this will accelerate much in the same way, frankly speaking, as solar has accelerated.
Okay, if we're very quick, we've got time for one more, just at the back over there. Thanks.
Thank you. Michelle Foss, Rice University. A few months ago in the Shell LNG Outlook, I felt that you all played a very important role and did a very useful thing by pointing to credit quality challenges for LNG buyers. And I just wonder if you could comment on that, especially with regard to how the industry will shelter itself to those challenges to keep the diversity of buyers going in view of emerging market challenges and other things.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Credit quality challenges. If I got your comment correctly, I think you have to see this in the broader evolution of the LNG market. What you have seen over the last 10, 15 years is a major change in the market structure, going from very few long-term, highly creditworthy buyers to a much more fragmented buyer universe. And there's actually not much you can do about it. Actually, in a way, you should welcome it, because it means that we can access a wider set of markets, also more emerging markets. But it does mean that, from a supplier perspective, you have a different risk profile to confront as well. We have countered that by saying we'll develop a portfolio of LNG contracts, both on the supply-demand side, which is pretty flexible, where we are okay to take more risk, if you like. We can commit to supply customers without a condition precedent of an FID in a supply project. But we can also switch if we find that some of our customers want to divert, cannot meet their obligations, want to do something else. So we cannot will our customers to be more creditworthy, but we can have a better proposition for them to be able to deal with their demands and needs as well. Which I see actually as a commercial strength, which many other players don't have. And I actually see as a very much needed and necessary thing as well, that we actually penetrate with natural gas into a wider array of markets than the traditional highly creditworthy markets of Japan, Korea, etc.
Okay, thank you. I think that's pretty much all we've got time for this morning, so please join me in thanking Ben for spending some time with us this morning. Thank you.